like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling, honestly, a pretty tough topic.
Yeah.
But a really important one, and that's the roots of violence. We're going to be exploring, like, why this happens, what can we look out for, and how can we best prepare children for a world where, unfortunately, this does exist.
Right.
So to do this, we've got two articles, both titled Understanding the Roots of Violence.
Okay.
And they're really interesting. There's a lot of overlap, but they come at it from like slightly different perspectives. One is really about identifying risk factors, like what are some things that we can look out for? And the other one is really emphasizing putting children's safety first and even like suggesting that it should be prioritized above things like gun control.
That's interesting because both articles actually seem to agree that violence doesn't really have one single cause.
Right.
It's much more complex than that. It's like a web of different things, like different influences, which I guess is why it makes it so tricky to find solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So instead of like having easy answers, we're going to kind of like dive into that complexity. And both articles actually highlight 10 potential warning signs. But one of the things that I noticed is that they group a lot of these signs together in similar ways.
Right.
So, for example, one of the big ones is mental health challenges.
Right.
And instead of just like listing disorders, they really go deep into like why this is such a relevant factor.
Right. And so they basically explain that things like, depression or anxiety or even like psychosis can actually kind of distort someone's view of the world. And of course, it's not about saying that everyone with those challenges is dangerous.
Right.
But it's just that those conditions can make it a bit harder to process reality accurately and sometimes can lead to kind of like people justifying harmful actions, potentially.
So it's more about understanding that mental health can be a contributing factor, not a direct cause.
Exactly. And that's why the articles stress professional help so much.
Yeah.
Things like counseling, medication, therapy, because these can all equip people with the tools to kind of manage their well-being, which then ultimately can reduce risk.
Yeah, it's like addressing a potential crack in the foundation, like before it becomes a major structural issue.
I love that analogy. That's a great analogy. And this idea of a foundation actually ties into the next cluster of warning signs that they talk about. So things like, the need for power and control, the desire for revenge, and even social isolation. And these all kind of speak to how an individual views themselves in relation to others.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about those being related that way, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's very subtle, but it's definitely there. So someone who feels powerless, for example, might try to exert control by being very dominant or aggressive. And if they've been wronged in the past, they might see revenge as a way to kind of like restore their sense of balance, even if it's through harmful actions. And of course, social isolation can really make all of this even worse because then someone feels unseen and unheard, which just intensifies those feelings.
So how do we address those kind of more deep-seated issues? Is it like as simple as throwing someone in a social group and hoping for the best?
Oh gosh, I wish it were that simple.
Right.
No, but the articles really talk about early intervention being really important, and this has to happen on multiple levels.
Okay.
So, for example, teaching conflict resolution skills. That can really help someone to kind of navigate disagreements without having to resort to aggression or, encouraging healthy emotional outlets like physical activity or maybe some kind of creative expression.
Right.
That can actually channel those feelings in positive ways.
So it's about giving people the tools to like cope with those feelings, whether it's powerlessness or injustice or isolation, before they turn into something that's harmful.
Precisely. And this actually ties back to the mental health piece that we were discussing. Because a lot of times addressing the mental health challenges can actually help with those feelings of powerlessness or isolation. And so that actually makes it less likely for those feelings to manifest in dangerous ways.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to be proactive on multiple fronts and not just like reacting when things reach like a crisis point.
Right.
I'm curious, what did the article say about kind of like more extreme cases like radicalization, for example?
Yeah, that's where things get even more complex.
Right.
So they both acknowledge that exposure to extreme ideologies, whether it's online or in person, can be really powerful, but they're careful to differentiate this from just, someone having strong opinions.
Right.
It's really about the intent behind the beliefs.
Yeah. So what are we actually looking for here? Like, how do we differentiate between, like, passionate debate and something that might be more dangerous?
Well, they point to a few key things. So, for example, sudden and really drastic shifts in beliefs, especially if those new beliefs involve hate speech or glorifying violence. That's a big red flag.
Right.
Also, affiliation with groups that are known for their extremist views.
Okay.
Essentially, it's about recognizing when a belief system becomes so rigid and inflexible that it actually justifies harming others who don't share those beliefs.
That's a chilling thought. It really makes you realize how important critical thinking skills are, especially in the world we live in today.
Oh, absolutely.
Where like information and misinformation just spreads so quickly.
Exactly. And that's why the articles emphasize the need for open dialogue and critical thinking as a countermeasure to radicalization. It's about teaching young people to question what they see and hear, evaluate their sources, and consider different perspectives.
So it's not about shutting down strong opinions, but about equipping people with the tools to navigate like a world of diverse and sometimes dangerous ideas. Yeah.
Exactly. But along with those, intellectual tools, they also talk about addressing the emotional vulnerabilities that can actually make someone susceptible to radicalization in the first place.
So it's not just the head, it's also the heart.
Yeah, exactly. Things like feeling isolated, misunderstood, lacking a sense of purpose. These things can create a void that extremist groups can easily exploit.
Right.
So that's why fostering a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose and community is so crucial. It's about providing positive alternative to those negative influences.
This makes me think about like the next warning sign on the list, which is the glorification of violence.
Yeah.
Because it seems like that would tie in here where, it might make violence seem more appealing or acceptable to someone who's already feeling lost or disillusioned.
Absolutely. And the articles discuss how constant exposure to violence, whether it's in media or video games or even just like real life events, can desensitize us to its impact.
Right.
And for someone who's already struggling, that can be especially dangerous.
It's like the more we see violence, the less shocking it becomes, and the easier it is to, like, accept it or even embrace it as a solution to problems.
Exactly. That's the danger. But the articles do offer some hope here, too. They talk about promoting nonviolent narratives, encouraging those creative outlets, and helping young people to really distinguish between entertainment and reality.
So it's about providing alternatives, like offering them different ways to process their emotions and experiences.
Precisely. It's about showing that violence isn't the only answer, that there are other, more constructive paths to take.
Yeah, that's a powerful message. It makes me think about another type of vulnerability that can contribute to violence, which is bullying and trauma.
Yeah, those are tough issues to address.
Yeah.
But the articles really emphasize the importance of what's called trauma-informed care.
Yeah.
And this means understanding how past experiences of bullying or abuse or other kinds of trauma can really impact a person's behavior.
So it's like recognizing that hurt people sometimes hurt people.
And that's not to excuse the behavior at all.
Right.
But it's a starting point for understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about the need for therapy that actually specifically addresses those past experiences and teaching resilience skills and coping skills. It's about helping individuals to heal and really break those cycles of violence.
Yeah, that's a really important point because I feel like we often focus on preventing violence in the present.
Right.
But it seems like addressing past trauma is so crucial too.
Absolutely.
Before we move on though, I'm curious about your take on the last two warning signs, and those are access to weapons and perceived injustice.
Right.
And I feel like those are especially relevant, in today's world.
Absolutely. And both articles acknowledge the role of, easy access to weapons, particularly firearms, in making violence more likely to happen. And again, it's not about demonizing weapons at all.
Right.
It's just about recognizing that if someone is already struggling with some of these other issues we've been talking about, having easy access to a weapon just makes it that much easier to act on those impulses.
So it's about like reducing the risk, making it harder for those like impulsive actions to actually occur.
Exactly. So things like securing weapons, immediately addressing any threats that are made, and really having open and honest conversations about responsible ownership.
And what about perceived injustice? Because that feels so pervasive in society today. It feels like so many people are feeling like they're being treated unfairly in different ways.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely a complex issue. The articles talk about, how important it is to help people to focus on what they can control
Yeah.
and shifting their mindsets away from just dwelling on those grievances all the time.
So instead of getting stuck in a cycle of anger and resentment, it's about like finding ways to channel those feelings into something positive or constructive.
Exactly. So whether it's advocating for change, finding healthy outlets for expressing those feelings, or even just focusing on personal growth, it's about empowering individuals to take positive action.
Yeah. Well, this has been so insightful, but I have to say I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot to process.
It really is. But what I think is so fascinating about both of these articles is that they actually offer a lot of hope, too.
Right.
They actually give concrete solutions and ways to actually address these really complex issues.
Yeah.
So that's actually what we're going to dive into next.
Awesome. So stay with us as we explore how to prepare children and ourselves for a world where violence exists,
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to define us.
right. So we've just explored this really complex web of warning signs,
Yeah.
right, and underlying vulnerabilities that can actually contribute to violence.
It's heavy stuff, but I think what struck me is that both articles actually offer a sense of hope. They don't leave us feeling totally powerless. Instead, they actually highlight ways that we can prepare children for this reality without, like, overwhelming them with fear.
Yeah, it's a really delicate balance,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need to equip them with the knowledge and the skills to navigate a world where, unfortunately, violence exists.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to let fear be the driving force in their lives.
Absolutely. It's like that saying, like, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. But I'm curious, how do the articles actually suggest we have these conversations with children without, like, scaring the living daylights out of them?
Well, they really emphasize open and age-appropriate conversations about empathy and mental health.
Okay.
And about reporting concerning behavior. So instead of shying away from these topics, we need to make them approachable
Right.
and understandable for young minds.
So, like, meeting them where they're at developmentally, using language and examples that they can actually grasp.
Exactly. And both articles actually highlight some really key areas to focus on. One that really stood out to me was teaching empathy and inclusion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because it seems like the more we understand and value others, the less likely we are to see them as like targets or enemies.
It's about breaking down those barriers,
Mm-mm.
right? Those us versus them mentalities that can lead to so much prejudice and discrimination.
Right.
And the articles actually suggest some really creative ways to do this, like, kindness challenges, role-playing exercises
Mhm.
that encourage perspective taking, and even just like simple acts of service in the community.
Yeah. It's about like cultivating compassion from a young age
Right.
and showing them that even small actions can have a big impact. What other areas did the articles emphasize?
Another really crucial one is building emotional resilience.
Mm.
We all experience anger and frustration, sadness. It's part of being human.
Right.
But it's about learning how to actually manage those emotions in healthy ways.
So giving them like the tools to cope when things get tough instead of letting those feelings kind of spiral out of control.
Exactly. The articles talk about teaching children specific coping mechanisms for anger and frustration,
Okay.
like mindfulness techniques or problem-solving skills, and even just, knowing when and how to ask for help.
It's like giving them a toolkit for navigating those choppy waters. What else is in this toolkit for building resilience?
Another really big one is conflict resolution. So this is about learning how to disagree respectfully,
Mm-hmm.
finding common ground, even when tensions are running high.
So equipping them with like the skills to handle disagreements in constructive ways instead of resorting to aggression or violence.
Precisely. And the articles suggest teaching, negotiation skills, active listening, the art of compromise,
Mm-hmm.
basically showing them that there are alternatives to fighting or just shutting down completely.
It's about empowering them to be peacemakers, not troublemakers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sensing like a theme here, like equipping children with the tools and skills they need to navigate like difficult situations.
You're absolutely picking up on a key point here.
Yeah.
These articles aren't just about warning signs, they're about empowering action and resilience. And this actually leads into another important area that they both discuss, which is media consumption.
Oh, yeah, that's a hot topic these days, especially with so much content so readily available.
Absolutely. It's about being mindful of what children are exposed to and really guiding them towards positive influences. And it's not about shielding them from reality,
Right.
but it's about helping them to develop a critical lens.
So having conversations about like the difference between entertainment and reality, teaching them to question what they see and what they hear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they suggest some interesting approaches, talking about the intent behind media messages, exploring different perspectives on the same event, even creating their own media that promotes positive values.
It's about making them active participants in their media consumption.
Right.
Not just like passive receivers.
Precisely. And this really ties into the final and perhaps most foundational element, which is open dialogue.
Creating that safe space where children feel comfortable sharing like their thoughts and their feelings without judgment or fear of repercussions.
Exactly. It's about building trust, showing them that they can come to us with anything, even the tough stuff. And the articles emphasize that this open dialogue needs to be ongoing,
Right.
not just a one-time conversation.
It's about creating like a culture of communication where like questions are encouraged and vulnerability is met with support.
Exactly.
It sounds like we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have. But there's one more point I want to highlight. While both articles offer a lot of similar advice, they actually diverge when it comes to policy recommendations. One article specifically advocates for prioritizing children's safety over gun loss.
That's a bold stance.
Yeah,
It definitely evokes like strong emotions, I think, on both sides of the debate.
it does. And it raises an important question. What does prioritizing children's safety actually look like in practice?
Right.
Does it involve stricter gun control measures, or are there other approaches that might be more effective?
It's a complex issue. There's no easy answers. But I appreciate that the articles kind of present these different perspectives. And it makes us like think critically about the solutions that we're advocating for.
It's a reminder that there are many ways to approach this issue, and it's so important to consider all of them,
Right.
even the ones that we might not initially agree with.
So we've explored, the warning signs and the importance of early intervention and concrete strategies for preparing children. But I can't help but wonder, like, are there lessons here for adults as well? Can we apply these same principles to our own lives?
That's a brilliant question,
Yeah.
and one that actually leads us into the final part of our deep dive.
So we've been talking about how to prepare children for a world where violence exists. But, as we were just discussing, I can't help but wonder, like, are there lessons here for us as adults too?
I think that's such a great question. It's so easy to focus on protecting children, which of course is vital.
Right.
But we often forget that adults can be vulnerable too.
Yeah, it's easy to just assume that we're somehow immune to these risks, just because we're older or we have more experience.
Right.
But the reality is that a lot of these factors that contribute to violence, they can affect people of all ages.
Exactly. Think about those warning signs that we talked about earlier.
Yep.
Things like social isolation, mental health challenges, perceived injustice, exposure to violence. These don't just disappear when we turn 18 or 21.
Right. And if anything, I feel like adult life can sometimes like intensify those risks.
Oh, absolutely.
We face different kinds of pressures like financial stress or work burnout or relationship challenges.
Right.
And those things can really erode our resilience and make us more susceptible to those negative influences.
It's like those cracks in the foundation that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
They can develop at any age, and if we're not careful to address them, they can really weaken our ability to cope with stress and adversity.
So maybe we need to like apply some of these same strategies that we were talking about for children to our own lives as adults, like building emotional resilience or practicing conflict resolution, or even just being more mindful of our media consumption.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
These tools, these skills, they're not just for kids.
Right.
They're essential life skills that can benefit everyone. Maybe we could all use a little refresher course in empathy or in active listening,
Mm-hmm.
or in finding healthy outlets for our anger and frustration.
Yeah. And what about that idea of open dialogue? It
Yeah.
seems like that's crucial for adults as well,
Yeah.
Creating those safe spaces where we can actually talk about these difficult issues, share our struggles, and support each other without judgment.
Oh, that's so important. We needed to break down the stigma surrounding mental health
Mm-hmm.
and create a culture where it's okay to ask for help. where vulnerability is seen as a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah. And maybe that's like a key takeaway from this whole deep dive, the importance of connection, both for children and for adults. Like feeling connected to others, to a community, to something larger than ourselves. That can be like a really powerful antidote to those forces that can lead to violence.
You've hit on such a profound point.
Yeah.
When we feel isolated, when we feel disconnected or like we don't belong,
Right.
it's so much easier to fall prey to those negative influences, to see others as threats instead of fellow human beings. But when we foster connection, when we build bridges of understanding and empathy, we create a more resilient, more compassionate world for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a renewed sense of hope, but also like a sense of responsibility, you know?
Good.
We all have a role to play in creating a world where violence is less likely to take root, both in the lives of children and in our own lives as adults.
It's an ongoing journey, and it requires, effort and awareness from all of us. But it's a journey worth taking, and I believe it can lead to a much brighter future.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. And remember, even though we've reached the end of this episode, the conversation doesn't have to end here.
Right.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Right.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get